Get that started. All right. Hello, guys. Welcome to your first AP World History test review. Hopefully, for most of you, this is going to be your first adventure into AP history classes. And so you're going to see it's pretty difficult, but I'm going to do my best to help you guys be successful in this class. I hope that you use this review resource the way it should be used. Sometimes students don't. So let's jump into this test. It's just 25 questions, but you'll see that AP tests are a little harder than the ones you've been used to. Okay, so in Unit 1, we got 7 topics. And the first of these topics is going to be topic number 1.1, which is the developments in East Asia from 1200 to 1450. All right. So we're going to start here in East Asia. What we're talking about really is China for the most part, as well as Japan and Korea to some degree as well. And so the Song Dynasty is the most important of the ones that we're going to talk about here in East Asia. The Song Dynasty is it's centralized power in China. They're a part of the Mandate of Heaven, which had been going on in China for thousands of years. And really, the Mandate of Heaven is fairly simple. It's the idea that a certain family gains control of the people, and that the gods basically have willed them to do so. And then life happens. They'll do some good things. They'll make some innovations. They'll make some progress, and they're going to have to tax people to get some of those things done. And as time goes by, taxes tend to increase and natural disasters happen. And then sort of rulers become kind of corrupt and they tax too heavily and the people get tired of it. And eventually what will happen is there'll be rebellions. And with that family, which might have ruled for 4, 5, 600 years, will be overthrown and a new family will take over and they'll have the new mandate of heaven. It sort of justifies the occasional rebellion when your leaders aren't doing what they really need to do. So it's kind of a built-in fail-safe to the political system there in China. Now, another important aspect of China in this time period is Confucianism, which predates the Song Dynasty by a significant amount. And Confucianism is really going to be sort of the backbone of Chinese society as far as the educational system goes. And Confucianism, it focuses on restoring social order, and it's sort of patriarchal in that it talks about your relationship as a person, as a normal person, between you and your ruler, which is going to be a man for the most part, and your relationship with your father, and that your filial piety, as you can see there on the bullet points, which is basically respect for the men, especially your oldest, like the grandfathers and stuff. They're really going to run things in Chinese society in this time period. Another innovation that's really important in this time period for the Song Dynasty is the advent of champa rice. That's going to be imported by or from Vietnam, and they're going to take that rice, and it's a fast ripening rice. They're going to get multiple harvests in a single year, and so we're going to get more population equals, or more food equals more population, and China's population is really going to get off the ground. The Song are also responsible for the Grand Canal, which is something that's very important. It's going to link sort of the southern food producing regions with the northern regions of China. It's going to make the Song Dynasty very successful. It's going to make China very successful in this time period. Really, China's sort of the biggest of all big dogs. They have luxury items that are going out onto the famous Silk Roads. Silk, which is in this time period only found in China. It's made from a worm. Very important. It's a state secret. People lose their heads trying to come in and steal silkworms and gain control of that production. They also export porcelain, which is, like stuff you eat on, right? Fine china is what it comes to be known in some areas. And all of these things are going to make China uh, sort of the innovative place in the world, the rich place in the world. There are many, many times that China is the most dominant place on earth. And this is sort of going to be one of those. Okay, so on to topic number 2, which shifts from China and into the developments in Dar al Islam. Now, that's a term that you're probably not that familiar with. coming into the class. But basically, what Dar al Islam means is that everything that Islam touches. And so, Islam is a religion, of course, it's a major religion, it's the world's second biggest religion. And it is going to spread throughout the ancient world. So, we're talking Africa, Asia, and also Europe as well. And so we just want to highlight some of the important advents here. So, of course, Islam started with Muhammad well before our time period. Our time period in AP history, of course, starts at 1200. So, Islam's been around for about 600 years by this time. The Islamic empires were really founded by the Umayyads, who went on about a 100-year rampage of just creating an enormous empire, huge empire. Took up much of the old Roman Empire. But eventually they would be overthrown, and the Abbasids would come in, and that family dynasty would take over. And, and there would be a period of peace, really. They're no longer conquering under the Abbasids. They're really more about literature and culture and things of that nature. So we do get a continuity of religion. Islam is going to be the dominant religion. However, they are tolerant towards people of the book. Those are Jews and Christians, because they're basically cousins here. Jews were the first monotheistic religion in the world, and they've been around for a very long time. And then Christianity popped up about 2,000 years ago. And about 600 years ago, or 600 years after Christianity emerged, you would get the splinter cell of Islam. But there's a lot of connections there. We'll talk about those a little bit more later on. But the Abbasids were dominated by Turkic peoples, formerly nomadic peoples. And what's really, really important about this time period is that you're going to see Islam spread. And you need to know how it spreads. It's going to spread through merchants. That's one of the easiest ways for it to spread. Merchants were really the people in the ancient world that were moving. Most other people, you lived and died in the same place, but merchants were the ones that would actually travel, from here to there. And so merchants would take the religion with them. So Islam merchants who are traveling all over the ancient world are taking the religion with them. Sometimes they're taking missionaries with them. And some of the best missionaries were the Sufis, which is sort of like a mystical branch of Islam. A way that I always kind of tell students to think about them is that they were sort of more adaptable to local customs. And so Sufis will be really popular in places like Africa. And you'll see that Islam in Africa is different than Islam is in the Middle East. And we'll talk about those things in other units. We're really just kind of introducing topics here in Unit 1. But that's really what you need to know, how Islam spreads through merchants and the missionaries and stuff. Okay? All right, on to the next topic. A blank face. There we go. All right. 1.3, the topic is the developments in South and Southeast Asia. Geography is very difficult for a lot of my students coming in. And so obviously we've talked about this in class already, but we're going to do a little bit of review here. So remember that when we talk about South Asia, primarily we're talking about India. You can see on my map in the far left corner there, it adds Pakistan and Afghanistan. Those are really areas that kind of belong to ancient India. And you got Bangladesh and some other ones on the side. But really, for simplicity's sake, remember India. Okay, the bigger map here to the right is, of course, Southeast Asia. You can kind of see Thailand and Vietnam, and then, of course, Malaysia, the Philippines, really what we kind of think of as the Spice Islands. And, we're going to talk about what happens in these two areas. India is the big dog here in a lot of ways, but don't sleep on the Spice Islands. They become pretty important, mostly because of trade of spices, of course. All right, so these areas are the home of old religions, especially India, the world's oldest organized religion, which is Hinduism. It's a polytheistic religion where, they believe in multiple gods. It started in India. And then along, thousands of years later, you get Siddhartha Gautama, he'll start Buddhism. And so Hindus, and one of the things about it is Hindus believe in this caste system, and there's 1,400 different jatis, which are kind of subcasts, but it puts people in their place in society. And, you could only have dealings with certain peoples that fit into your jatis and whatnot. You could only marry peoples from your jatis and all this stuff. And eventually, some people kind of got tired of that, and Gautama was one of those, and he becomes the Buddha, which means enlightened one. And one of the difference between Buddhism and Hinduism is, you have this belief in reincarnation and whatnot, but in Buddhism, you're not really being punished. In Hinduism, if you're born a woman, that's a punishment, and you're supposed to accept your lot in life. If you were an undertaker, if you're one of these people that are low on the totem pole, you're supposed to just accept it and not kind of aim for higher. Whereas Buddhism, it's much more appealing to women and poor people. There's sort of a spiritual equality there that doesn't really exist in Hinduism. And Hinduism is sort of unique in that while it's a large religion, it's really only going to take hold in India. Whereas Buddhism is going to start in India, but it's really going to become more popular in other places like China and Japan later on. It's going to spread as well, as you'll see many of these ancient religions do. Islam will find its way into India, especially through the Sultanate of Delhi, which will control large swaths of India. I think we got a map coming up on that. But there is continuity behind the state buildings and the stuff going on in this area. Here you can see Angkor Wat, which is a temple there in the Southeast Asia area. Oh, I thought I had a map. I guess I don't. I'm sorry. Okay, on to the next topic then. Let's take a pause here. Let's go back to 1.3 and just remember that the Sultanate of Delhi is, for the most part, in the northern part of India. It never catches all of India. The tip of India is never going to be under control of the Sultanate of Delhi. Sometimes you'll get like the Vijayanagar Empire that takes control there. India is going to be a battleground really for religion, and we're going to come back to India several times throughout this course, and you're going to see that 75% of India for the most part is Hinduism, while about 25% will become Islam because of the Sultanate of Delhi's impact on India. There will be a few Christians, there will be a few Buddhists and Sikhs and people like that, but for the most part, it's going to be Hindus and Muslims that are kind of vying for control of India. All right, so on to the next topic. 1.4, state building in the Americas. It's not a whole lot. This topic isn't going to be sort of as important as maybe some of the other ones, but there are some interesting cultures here. This comes after the Mayans. The Mayans kind of predate the 1200 time period that we're talking about. The Mayans had really already abandoned their cities, and those were kind of overgrown by the jungles by the 1200s and whatnot. So the two that where you really got to know here are, of course, the Aztecs and the Inca. So we've got a map on the left of the Aztecs. And what you'll notice, that geographically speaking, that they are in the central valleys of Mexico. They gained their empire through military conquest. They create basically a tributary society where people had to supply them with slaves for sacrifice and for money and food and all those things. Very tough people. So again, believe in human sacrifice. They had calendars, great astronomers, much like the Mayans. You can see the Mayan influence on the Aztecs. Here to the right, you'll see this is South America, whereas Mexico is part of North America, actually. The Inca are part of South America, and it's going to be a very long empire, about 2,500 miles in length. So that's, almost as wide as the United States is. So it's a sizable empire. It's also geographically difficult because it is located up in the Andes Mountains. So many of the places in this empire are 8,000 feet above sea level. So similarities here, there are some. I mean, they're both empires. But the Inca are a little bit more decentralized. They have kind of like four rulers that answer to an emperor and whatnot because their empire is so big, it's so long. And in those time periods, they have runners and whatnot that would try to, keep messages from one part of the empire to the other. But when it's something that's big in that time period, it just you have to be a little bit more decentralized. They also don't have human sacrifices like they do with the Aztecs. So there are some differences there. The Aztecs have a written language, whereas the Inca do not. They used the quipu, if you remember the system of knotted strings, which was really just it was financial transactions more than anything else. Okay, so yeah, state building in the Americas. Conquest is the similarity there. The Inca they're like the Romans of the New World, if you will. They're great engineers. They create some really awesome masterpieces without even concrete to hold them together. That they cut stones really well. You also have a lot of pyramid building in the Aztec Empire. So both of these are very advanced, and they're Tenochtitlan is the capital of the Aztecs, and you're talking 300,000 people here. It's larger than any of the European cities when the conquistadors show up to take them over. Another similarity between these two is that the Spanish conquistadors are going to take over both of them. Pizarro will take over South America, the Incas, and then Cortez, of course, before him, takes over the Aztec Empire. All right. Another thing you got to think about, I didn't mention, is the importance of maize in both of or especially the Aztec society. Maize, which basically another way of saying corn. There's a lot of foodstuffs that we're going to see in later units that come from this part of the world, but maize is really the most important. Then you see the other things we talked about. Chinapas, remember, those are the floating gardens that are going to be used by the Aztecs. Pretty ingenious way. They built their capital on a lake, and so they needed more areas to be able to farm. And so they basically create these floating gardens that are going to help feed a very large populace. Okay. And again, both fall to the Spanish. All right. Topic 1.5, we're moving to Africa. Here on the left, you see a map of Great Zimbabwe. This is a structure, 15, 20,000 people in it. It's a walled city. It shows centralization, the fact that they have a government and that people are answering to this government. On the right, you see a map of Ethiopia. Ethiopia is going to be interesting for several different reasons. They're advanced, of course, but they're also going to be sort of one of the last places in Africa that has some Christianity. So Africa has these, their own religions, shamanism and whatnot, before the Muslims arrive. The Muslims convert a lot of Africans to Islam, and there are some areas where Christian missionaries make inroads, and those will the holdouts will be some Christianity in Egypt and Christianity here in Ethiopia. All right, so the Bantu are really important to African history. That's a sub-Saharan group. If you can see on the map here, the Sahara is that brownish, huge mass, the world's largest desert. The Bantu are sub-Saharan, which means below. And so they're going to migrate throughout central, southern, and into eastern parts of Africa. And they're going to bring three really important things with them. Probably the most important, of course, is their agriculture. So the peoples that they were replacing, pygmies and other peoples, they were hunters and gatherers, nomadic peoples, and the Bantu aren't. And so when they know how to farm, they have farming practices and techniques that are going to mean that the Bantu have larger populations, because farming supports larger populations than hunting and gathering does. They also have iron technology, which gives them a very big advantage in fighting. Their language is very important as well. The Bantu language is going to spread, and while there are many different dialects in Africa, something like 1,000 or so, there will be many peoples who link theirs back to Bantu native tongues. Griots, you know them as well. Griots are African storytellers. These are men that from a young age would be trained to remember all of that tribe's very important stories, and because they don't have writing in many of these sub-Saharan communities. And so they are basically committing this to memory, and so that their stories don't die. It's a tradition of oral storytelling, if you will. I put kin-based societies on there before the rise of the great African empires that we'll talk about in later units, such as the Mali and Songhai and stuff like that. You had these kin-based societies, which is really just small villages, 100 or less people. And most of the people there are related through like marriages and some kind of kin-based stuff, not inbreeding or anything like that, but just they've married into close little families and stuff. And the kids will have like age appropriate jobs. to themselves, and you're basically led by chieftains and whatnot. So Africa will have a bigger impact in the units to come. This one, we just want to introduce the importance of the Bantu. Understand that Africa is kind of, I won't say invaded, but the Muslims are coming and they're going to really reshape Africa in a lot of ways. All right, so the last major topic really is the developments in Europe from 1200 to 1450. Now, this is part of the Middle Ages, what some people call the Dark Ages. This will be the later part of it. And you got to understand that the church is the single most important institution of the Middle Ages, and that church being the Roman Catholic Church, which is a Christian church. However, because of Dar al Islam, there were time periods in the sevens, eights, 900s, and all that where about half of Europe was under control of the Muslims, all the way through Spain, nearly took over France as well, except for the Battle of Tours. But you also have Jews there as well. And so you have three major religions that have a place in Europe. Just in the period from by 1200, they had pushed out a lot of the Muslims except for Spain. And after 1450, during the Reconquista, they're going to go ahead and push out the rest of the Muslims as well. And Europe will truly be Christian dominated for sure. It's politically fragmented, meaning it's very decentralized. You have all these different countries with different kings and whatnot, and we'll kind of hit those topics more in different units, like your your different types of monarchs and whatnot. But the biggest important thing you need to know is feudalism and manorialism. Uh, Feudalism is it's basically this system between lords and the kings on who owns land and who owes fealty and stuff like that. Manorialism, and I have a graphic coming up. Manorialism, you'll see, is really the everyday kind of social economic system that takes place in Europe, and we'll talk about it a little bit more. Europe is definitely an agricultural society. You're talking 97, 98% of the people, perhaps even more in some areas, are farmers. They're peasants. That's what they do. Or they might even be serfs, which is worse, of course, than being a peasant. The Black Death, which came in the mid 1300s, has a major impact on Europe because it kills so many Europeans that the labor force is going to fall off dramatically. It's actually going to kind of shake up manorialism, kind of mess up feudalism a little bit. And it's going to give, for a short time, it's going to give workers rights to the common people. So there's some feudalism versus manorialism. You need to know the difference. Feudalism being a social, political, and economic system. The relation is the lord to which all land held in fee and chief characteristics are homage, the service of tenants under arms, and in court worship. Okay, that's a lot of big words for you there. Manorialism is an economic social structure based on medieval manor. So what that is this big, nice, fancy house that the lord lives in. And what he does, he has fields that servants work on, his peasants work on, and he has knights. The knight's job is to protect the workers so that they can farm, because that makes him money. He sells his crops to other places. That makes him his money. What do the servants get out of it? They get protection. They get to eat their crops, so they're never going hungry, but they're not rich either. They don't have additional income beyond that. So it's a system very much that benefits the lords at the expense of the common person. I put on here too a comparison between Japanese feudalism and European feudalism. There are a lot of similarities. At the top you have an emperor or eventually a shogun at the top in Japanese society. You have the king in European society. Underneath the king you have nobles. In Japan you have the daimyo, which are just samurai nobles. Underneath samurai nobles, you have samurai, which are the Japanese equivalent of a knight. So in both places, their job is to protect the workers, to protect the peasants. Really, the big difference between these two systems of feudalism is at the bottom. So in Europe, the bottom is serfs, peasants and serfs. And then in Japan, because of Confucianism, they respect farmers at the expense of merchants. Farmers are actually middle class in Japanese society, while merchants, they're seen as kind of shady and sketchy. actually fall into the bottom there. Okay, so that's really the major differences between the two of those. All right. So I think this actually got moved, is what happened. But so Dar al Islam, there is the Delhi Sultanate. You can see it controls much of India. Uh, the middle one here is the Mamluk Sultanate. That's an interesting story where you had slaves in Egypt and surrounding areas. The Mamluks overthrew their Muslim masters and ruled their own empire for a short time. And then here in the right, where I'm cutting off a little bit of it, that's the Seljuk Empire. And so that's a group that takes over. And so the old Abbasid Empire gets kind of broken up and fragmented and whatnot. But you can see these areas are large areas under control of these governments. All right. So that looks like it's it. I would tell you that all of the things that we've talked about are focuses on this exam. 25 questions. I kept it to all topics that were that you would find on your exam here. For people who might be watching this from outside of Cedarville, I get people that see these videos sometimes. If you have any questions, if I see them, I'll try to go in there and answer them for you as well. There is one thing I see here. With the Chinese, we talked about Confucianism and its importance, but we didn't really talk about Daoism. And Daoism, it's more than a religion, it's a belief system. And it's sort of a way of the water, almost a hippie like belief system. And it was something that basically a lot of Confucius people could, they accepted it as well. All right. But it never had really the importance of Confucianism in Chinese society. Okay. So I think that's it. Hopefully, you guys can use this to be successful on your Unit 1 very first AP exam. Good luck, and I will see you later.